Welcome to CISO Insider, Nightfall's chat with Chief Information Security Officers. We host CISOs from different industries to discuss their pathways to the role, the challenges they face in their everyday work, and lessons they can share with anyone aspiring to become a CISO. This podcast brings you into the world of cybersecurity and gives you a window into the most brilliant minds in the business. I'm Chris Martinez. Today on CISO Insider, we have One Main Financial CISO, Michelle Valdez, joining us to discuss how to build a community of cybersecurity. Her approach is all about resiliency and reducing human risk to minimize the impact of security incidents. We talk about how she built this approach from her long career that began in the Air Force and now includes her work in fintech in the private sector. She also shares advice on how CISOs from all backgrounds can excel in the role, even CISOs without technical experience. Finally, we discuss how she thinks about data security as an InfoSec leader. Please join us in welcoming Michelle to CISO Insider. Okay, hello, Michelle Valdez from One Main Financial. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Can you walk us through your path in the Air Force as a cybersecurity expert? You've worked in some really fascinating roles in the Department of Defense, Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and the Department of Homeland Security.
Absolutely. So actually, my time in the Air Force had very little to do with cybersecurity. First of all, at the time, we didn't even call it cybersecurity. The term du jour was computer crime. And I was a federal investigator. So similar to the NCIS, I was in the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. And while computer forensics was involved in certainly some of the cases that I worked on, it wasn't my primary area of focus. But when I separated from the Air Force, I went to go work for one of my former commanders who was looking to stand up a Department of Defense computer forensic capability. The lab already existed and there was some training, but he was looking at creating a center of excellence, looking at how the Department of Defense was responding to any sort of crime, and particularly post 9/11, obviously there was a lot going on in the terrorism realm from a computer perspective. And so when he asked me to come join, of course, my first response was, I really don't know much about computers. But he brought me to help build the organization. And that was something that I had some experience with. So, we spent a little over 2 years standing up the Defense Cybercrime Center, which became one of the national cybercrime centers for, the entire federal government. In my work with them, and a bit when I was at the Director of National Intelligence, I definitely had more and more exposure to the cybersecurity field. It was something that was gaining some very fast traction across industry. And so I went back to we called it DC3, to help to stand up a information sharing relationship between defense contractors and the Department of Defense, which was a very challenging thing to do because these were contractors who were doing things for the Department of Defense and certainly were worried about DoD knowing about anything going on their network that might not be good. And they were worried it would impact their contracts. But I think very quickly people realized that this was not something that anybody could tackle alone. It's something that had to be addressed as a community, and it had to be addressed as a community with information sharing and transparency. And so I went from there to Department of Homeland Security to do the same thing for the rest of the critical infrastructure sectors. And so that's kind of been my path in the government for cybersecurity.
How did your work in the Air Force prep you for the CISO role?
I think part of it is leadership, obviously. I think one of the most important things that a CISO is a leader for the company in helping to drive cultural change, to drive a cybersecurity aware environment, to really help manage human risk. And that's what I did. I just did it in a different environment. I did it from a criminal perspective and then from a terrorism perspective. And now I do it from a cyber perspective. As an officer, obviously that is a leadership role. And, we are taught how to be a leader from the minute we even think about going into the military. So I think that definitely was a big contributor from me being willing to and interested and excited about taking on a role and bigger leadership roles as I progressed through my career. And this being a CISO was one of my ultimate goals. So so thrilled to be in this opportunity now.
And you mentioned being on the ground floor of cybersecurity post 9/11. How did things change for you in your work in the long term and in the short term? And how are we as cybersecurity professionals still impacted by that event today?
So I think that the response and the engagement that occurred across the intelligence community in response to 9/11 really set a path for the exact same thing that has happened in the cyber realm. Before 9/11, you had federal agencies who did not communicate, didn't coordinate. Some of them didn't even have the ability, like technically, to communicate with each other. And it drove a community, again, realizing that we had to do it together. And when cybersecurity really started to gain, get awareness in the general industry public, a view, particularly as some defense industrial based contractors were really starting to get impacted by, foreign actors, the same thing happened. And it was really taking the lessons learned. And a lot of people had been in the intelligence community during 9/11. So it was taking the lessons learned from that building of a community and building of communication and transparency and partnership and collaboration that occurred in the cybersecurity space. And certainly you see it as being one of the greatest things that has ever occurred across industry, is how industries come together and works together as a team to try and protect each other.
How did you get involved with the Carnegie Mellon University Software Engineering Institute? And can you share lessons and insights from your experience in that department?
Yeah, Carnegie Mellon is one of the federally funded research and development centers for the Department of Defense. That's what the Software Engineering Institute does, primarily helping to build different technical capabilities across the department, one of them being cybersecurity. They were the first CERT, and really the actual true only CERT. And CERT for them, CERT, is actually not an acronym. It is the name of the organization. And they worked with Department of Homeland Security to stand up US CERT and have helped other parts of the Department of Defense and federal government and industry do the same. I was working with a different contractor within the Department of Defense, and Carnegie Mellon SEI had people at DC3. And when I heard that they were going to be building a similar information sharing program for all of critical infrastructure, I said, I want to be part of that. And so I reached out to the leader of that team, and he brought me on board and gave me that program to build and lead.
You transitioned to the private sector in 2015 as the Senior Director of Enterprise Cyber Resilience at Capital One. Can you share the similarities and differences of working in the public and private sectors?
Yeah, I would say it's very different, which is what I tell anybody who has spent their entire career in the government like I did and is looking to come into industry. So when I was interviewing people at Capital One and in my current organization, it's one of the things that I make sure people understand how different it is. One is the speed. Industry can move at speed, and in many cases moves at speed. We can make decisions very quickly. We can acquire things quickly. We can develop programs from scratch to full programs in short periods of time. That is very difficult to do in the government. The government has layers of bureaucracy for a reason. It's important that they are set up the way they are. I think in some cases there's more layers than needs to be. But I remember in the government, I often felt like as if we were stuck in the bureaucracy of making a decision. We used to joke that it would take us 2 years to have the meeting in order to discuss whether or not we were going to do something. It's an exaggeration, but in Capital One, when I joined, I started with no team. It was just me. My boss said, go build a team. And I was like, okay, well, like how many people and what kind of budget? And he's like, just go build the team you need. I will make sure you have what you need. Totally different. Everything is counted as number of people, every dollar spent. It's not that in industry, there's not that same level of accountability and planning. It's just a different way of doing it. It doesn't have to go through 7 layers of approval a year prior, or 2 years prior in some cases to what you might need. So speed is definitely a big one. I also think that there's a cultural difference. I had to learn how to be a better leader when I went into industry, because what I had learned in my leadership style that may have been effective in the government, it was not effective in industry. And so, I credit Capital One, especially in making me a better person and helping me become a better leader, because I learned how to be a servant leader, and I learned how to be compassionate and empathy and actually form bonds with my team members. That was something that would have been very uncomfortable and difficult to do when I was working with the government. So culture is a big one, and speed. Those are probably the biggest. Similarities, I just think it's, industry has same missions as the government does. The mission may be different, but there's not any less dedication and drive and passion for those missions in industry than there is in the government. And I think that that's something that some people may not realize.
Do you have any advice on how cybersecurity professionals can build their careers to get to the CISO role based on your path and experiences?
Yeah, first I would say is don't convince yourself you can't do it, particularly if you don't have a deep technical background. I think that there are some companies and some CISO roles where the way that it is structured, they want somebody who is highly technical. And so those just aren't going to be the right roles for somebody who isn't highly technical, who hasn't been an engineer, who hasn't been in incident response, working in a SOC. There are roles and more roles these days that are there where people are looking for leaders who can communicate to the business in a non-technical way, in a way that's meaningful to them, and who manage risk. It's, more and more becoming about managing risk. I think it's always been that way, but I think it's now driving, in some cases, different skill sets. It always depends upon each organization, but I was very fortunate to be brought on to a role where I work for our chief risk officer, and I focus on risk. I mean, it is all about how are we ensuring that we are minimizing the risk to our company from a cybersecurity perspective. I don't have a technical background. I never coded. I never was an engineer. I had a law enforcement background. And I built programs in organizations, and I'm a process person. I, at one point, convinced myself there was no way I could do this role. Never going to be able to get there because I just wasn't technical enough. So what I would suggest to people is learn the different aspects of cyber. You don't have to be experts in them. As a matter of fact, I think it's almost problematic if you're too much of an expert in any one field, because it's hard for you to then let your team lead and do what they need to do, and for you to be more strategic. But learn the different aspects. Surround yourself with experts who can help teach you. I mean, I hire some of the greatest experts who know way more about anything than I do about what they do, and that's actually how it should be. You want to surround yourself with the best people, because one, I learn from them every day, and it makes us have a better program because of it. Cybersecurity is still this mystical thing to a lot of people. They're just like, that's in the news, and I don't have to worry about it because there's a team of people who do everything about it. Like, I don't even have to concern myself. And that's one of the hardest things when you're building a framework and you're building a program that you really have to transform, is helping everybody understand their critical role in cybersecurity, regardless of what they do. It's also, I think, important to learn how to communicate. Communication more and more is really important. And if you can learn how to translate something very technical in a way that makes sense to a business leader, which means you've got to spend time with business leaders. You need to understand their world, their pain points, their concerns. What is that security is doing that is causing friction for their team? And really standing in their shoes and understanding it from their perspective. That, to me, is going to make a more successful CISO than somebody who's been an engineer, in my opinion. I think that also just making sure that you take the opportunity to work with cybersecurity teams. I know that there are some people who take on a CISO role who probably have never been in cybersecurity, but I think that's probably rarer. So find different roles on both a first line operational perspective or second line from a risk perspective that will expose you to cybersecurity and the importance of it. But really, I think it's important to understand risk, understand how to communicate, and especially communicate to the business and ultimately to your board.
How can security leaders stay grounded during major security incidents?
Take deep breaths. It is so hard that when things are happening and you're in this incident response mode, you have to be the calm under pressure. You have to be the calming influence because people are going to be spinning. And if there isn't somebody who's doing that, you're going to miss things. Things are going to get done. You're actually opening yourself up to more threat and you're opening yourself up to not actually fully responding to an incident. So take a step back, trust your leaders to do what they need to do. Make sure that they're keeping you informed, but try not to get into the weeds. Try not to become the incident responder because that's actually going to make it more difficult for your team members to be actually very successful, but also going to make it more difficult to ensure that you're being that one who's calm under pressure. Also, keep the executives informed and away from the incident response team. You have to provide that layer because there's going to be an information machine that is happening and there's going to be, many people who want to know what's going on. And your role is to make sure that they understand it and are leaving the team who needs to be responding alone.
I think this next question might touch on some of those themes. We all work in an industry that's so focused on big growth and valuation numbers, but failure is a big part of that cycle that is almost never addressed properly. How can cybersecurity leaders approach failure constructively and make it less of a taboo?
I make it part of my culture right now in non-instant mode. My role is to enable and empower my teams to be successful and to give them impenetrable top cover. And impenetrable top cover means I want them to try things. I want them to take risks. I want them to not be afraid of failure. And when they do fail, focus on the lessons learned. Pick yourself up, dust yourself off. All right, what did we learn from this? Because a failure is only a failure if you don't learn from it. If you learn from it and you make improvements because of that, it's no longer a failure. It had a value. It may be a not so comfortable situation, but it's not a failure. And if you set that expectation and culture within your organization, and then you also set that expectation and culture with your leaders, meaning who I work for and the executive leadership team, then when something happens, if you demonstrate that here's what happened, we know what happened, we're not making excuses, we've thoroughly done root cause. We haven't just fixed the tactical or technical problem. We've gone all the way down to identify really what caused this. And you're learning from that and you're making adjustments and you're maturing from that. If you're able to do that, I have seen many CISO who have survived and thrived after a major breach. And it was because of, I think, the fact that it wasn't seen as a failure. It was seen as something that didn't go right, a break, but not a failure. And I think that that's, kind of the key.
What are the biggest challenges ahead for the industry in the post-COVID era?
I actually think that this is going to be probably the most difficult time for cybersecurity professionals. I know that a lot of people felt that going into COVID was incredibly challenging because so many companies went from not working from home to working from home. And so you had to stand up a lot of capabilities in very short order. But I think that a lot of companies showed that they were able to do that. And the way that the technology and security teams within my company stepped up to the challenge, rose to the occasion, and just were highly successful, proved that was something that wasn't as challenging as I think everybody thought that it was. We're now going into a hybrid environment. And that hybrid environment, I think, is going to be more challenging than anything from a cybersecurity perspective that we've ever faced, because you're going to have some people remote, some people in the office on different times, people who've been working from home now going into the office. And when you're at home, you don't perform the same kind of security behaviors as you do in the office. And so reminding them as that transition happens of what are the things you need to do. Simple things. Lock your computer before you walk away. Like, I guarantee you, nobody at their house probably locks their computer when they step away because they're in their home office. So to me, there's this seam, I call it a seam, we're in this in between, which I think is going to become reality. I don't ever see us going back to everybody's fully in the office across the entire workforce. I think people have learned that there is a wonderful balance that can be achieved both from an effectiveness and a deliverable perspective and from a personal perspective that can absolutely make a better environment and a better workforce than we've ever had. But it is going to mean we're going to have less people in the office, and we're going to have to make sure that we're building in the different types of controls that are necessary in both environments, and not just solely focused on one or the other, which is what we've been doing in the past, unless you were already a hybrid workforce. But I know that that's something that we're definitely really focused on.
Would you be able to talk a little bit about some of those strategies?
What I would say, from not getting into any kind of specifics, but I think that as we move back into bringing people into the office, there's going to be a lot of things that we're going to do. Banners on logins, swag and tips put on people's desks, increased training and awareness types of activities, town halls. Really broadening the scope of how frequent and often we're talking to people about what they need to do. We're making sure that our annual awareness training is timed right around the time people are going back in the office. So things are sitting top of mind. We're very fortunate because Cybersecurity Awareness Month is going to be right around that time too. So we're going to take full advantage of that and make sure that we have a lot of different activities, probably more than others, and really trying to encourage people to attend both from a virtual and an in-person perspective. So, really having to think about how do we do this well in both environments, not just doing it in person so the virtual then don't get to take advantage, or the virtual and in person, you lose that opportunity engagement in person. So we're just really amping up a lot of our human risk, thinking about human risk aspects, especially around the time during that surge. And of course, I have no doubt that most companies are going to be really putting some enhanced monitoring in place as we move into that hybrid environment.
What should up-and-coming cybersecurity leaders look for in a mentor?
I would say that, kind of go back to what I talked about before, which is when I think about people who have mentored me, one is people who have helped me believe in myself. Imposter syndrome is a real thing. It's a real thing for CISOs. No matter your background, how long you've been in the role, whether you've done it before, whether you're a man, whether you're a woman, whether you're an underrepresented minority, it happens to every CISO that I know. So having people to talk to when that happens and help you through it. We have CISO groups where we just kind of rely on each other. Like, I'm having one of those days. Somebody who just prepares you for the communication challenges you're going to face, and the resource challenges. Having somebody, one of my mentors has been helping me and really, really helped prepare me for my first presentation to the board, because I was terrified. I was like, oh my God, I'm presenting to the board of directors and I've never done this before. And they really kind of helped me think through, here are the things that are important to convey and how, which was so beneficial. And those are the kind of things that I think can really help. And this is something that I have talked about, and when I've talked to other people about kind of the mentoring of CISOs, I think that it is something that we don't do well. And I don't know if you've seen the security strategy that the CISO at Equifax published a few weeks ago. I've never seen anybody publish anything like that before. I've read it at least 5 times now. And he speaks to that, how we do not as a community help to grow leaders the way that we should. I wish I had somebody that I could turn to ask, okay, I'm having this challenge, how do I do this? And not be worried that they think that I'm not competent enough to be a CISO because I have a challenge that they may think I should know. So having that community and having people that you can really trust, and tell you what you need to hear, and help you, but not judge you and in any way, shape, or form question your ability of being in the leadership position that you are.
Would you be able to share some of those CISO groups with our listeners?
So the ones that I have are just personal friends who are CISOs. You grow up in a community, but I know that there's a ton of them out there. And I've participated in several different roundtable conversations and Chatham House rule conversations. I know that there's one that's associated with the RSA conference, the CSAF, that brings together CISOs for Chatham House rule conversation around the RSA conference. I learn a ton from. And I think that there's ones in every single sector. The Information Sharing and Analysis Centers is also a great resource for cybersecurity and for CISOs. The ones that have been most valuable for me, though, have been my personal relationships. And there's several of us who are all on a Signal group, and we just share experiences, ask questions, look for advice. These are people that we can pick up the phone and call because we've all grown up together in this environment. And I think that those have been incredibly valuable relationships. But there's definitely no shortage of opportunities. Honestly, there's a ton of different podcast groups that you can leverage. If you hear somebody that is talking on a podcast or is participating in a webinar, reach out to them. Just connect and reach out to them. They can become an enormous resource to you, and you just didn't even know that they existed. So I definitely leverage a lot of these capabilities. That's how I got connected with you.
Awesome. I love that. How have you approached data security over your career as a CISO?
I think that this is something that is becoming more and more prominent in the CISO role than before. Early on, it was about protecting the environment. How do you protect the environment? At first it was keep people out, and people realized that was not realistic because nothing is impenetrable. So then it was, well, if they get in, keep them from getting anything out. And obviously that isn't working either. So I know that one of the things that we as an organization are really emphasizing from a cybersecurity perspective is the data. So as everybody's environment is changing and shifting, I mean, with COVID, we went from people being in the office to being working from home. So your attack surface has expanded, in many cases exploded. And that perimeter is starting to evaporate. So it really has to be about how do you protect the data? And that is a major key focus of our strategy at OneMain, is really making sure that we are putting in place the proper technology, the proper people, and the proper process to make sure that we are thinking through data security, so that if a bad actor gets into our environment, they aren't going to be able to get what is our best commodity, which is our data.
We're going to take a brief break and get back to more questions with Michelle Valdez from OneMain Financial. You're listening to CISO Insider from Nightfallai.
Nightfall DLP is the industry's first cloud-native data loss prevention solution designed for high-growth companies securing sensitive data across cloud apps like Slack, GitHub, and Google Drive. Traditional data security solutions are painful to implement, require heavy overhead, and have high false positive rates. Nightfall customers are up and running in minutes with our library of machine learning detectors to protect PII, PHI, and other industry-specific data. Our developer-centric platform allows security teams to configure constant inspection as code for customizable data protection. Learn more at cisoinsider.com/nightfallai.
Our last section here is a lightning round, and these questions are designed to be rapid-fire responses, but of course you can speak to them at any length you wish. What motivates you to get out of bed every day as a cybersecurity leader?
The impact that I think I make every day in protecting my company.
What are the top 2 lessons you've learned from your team in the last year?
Go slow to go fast. I'd learned that before, but I really learned it here, especially during COVID. The importance of connection, not just about work, but really making sure that you find ways to connect in a non-work way.
What does go slow to go fast mean?
Don't try and jump at a problem with the first solution that comes to mind. Don't, immediately go to implement a tool. take time to understand the environment, take time to understand the problem, take time to evaluate and think through downstream impacts, particularly on the workforce in a cybersecurity perspective. You want to put all of these things in place in order to protect the company, but you absolutely first have to think about the impact that's going to have on the workforce.
What are you most proud of in your career as an InfoSec executive?
The growth and seeing people who either I started my career with or started their career on my team, and seeing what they're doing today, seeing the amazing things that, people that I've interacted with throughout my career, everything that and where they are and the impacts that they're having. Just being a part of that. This is an amazing community to be a part of. And so when I think about from a cybersecurity perspective, just being able to see women leaders get into CISO roles that, started on my team and now they're becoming CISOs. That to me, that means I hopefully made a really positive impact on their life.
Which podcasts or books have you read lately that you can recommend to our listeners?
God, I don't have any time to read any books. I think that there are 3 podcasts that are excellent. I think this is a fantastic podcast for CISOs. The podcast of Humans in InfoSec that Carolyn Wong does is a fantastic podcast. It gives the perspective of leaders from a different, view. And David Sparks' podcast, also the challenges that they go after, the problems that they talk about, both in his podcast and on his Friday events. Those are ones that I regularly keep track of, but I haven't read any books lately.
Who has the time, right?
Podcasts have been my thing these days. I spend too much time on a computer as it is. Listening is better.
And thank you so much for saying that our podcast is amazing. And it's guests like you that make it really elevate it. So thank you.
No, this has been great. I was thrilled when you reached out and asked me to participate.
Awesome. And I think that leads into the last question here. Do you have anything you want to promote, like social media channels, articles you've written, pieces from your team, or anything like that?
So one thing I would like to promote, and you're going to see it in a lot of different places, is there's been a lot of work done understanding human risk. And there are, several companies that are really investing, and this isn't a vendor pitch, but there are companies that are investing in understanding this. So there's I think it's Scientia is the name of the publication, who looked at human risk. And that one's come out recently. That to me is something that anything that any information security leader can get and read about that and really understand what this research is showing, because it's different than a lot of us have thought all along. People think it's the most junior person who cooks on fishing links, and that's actually your middle managers who cook on fishing links. When that's happening, what time of day it's happening, it can really transform how you're thinking about how you do cybersecurity. The most important thing is if you really get into understanding the human risk, you can change your control environment where you're just focusing your very limited resources. We all have limited resources. Focus your very limited resources on the highest risk areas and take a different approach than the broad swath, everything for the enterprise the exact same way. So that's something I definitely encourage. There's been such great work this year in it. It was an entire section in the RSA conference for a reason. The other thing that I always, I'm a huge advocate of resiliency and understanding and balancing the typical cybersecurity program that focuses a lot on the threat with the focus on minimizing the impact, so that it doesn't matter what threat is coming at you, you've minimized the impact. So there's some great stuff that has been put out recently about resiliency. Those would be the things that I just strongly encourage anybody in information security and cybersecurity to consume and understand. It will change your viewpoint and can actually create some major improvements in your environment and in your personal life too.
Amazing work with Michelle Valdez, OneMain Financial CISO, Air Force veteran. Thank you for your service. Thank you for joining us on CISO Insider, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
You do the same. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to CISO Insider, a podcast created and sponsored by Nightfallai, the industry's first cloud-native data loss prevention solution. If you're enjoying the show, please leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts. The ratings and reviews help more people find us. Special thanks to Wendell Topper for podcast production support. Learn more about Wendell's work at www.createch.us. That's CREATEK.us. Follow Nightfall on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Nightfallai. That's Nightfallai. And email us at marketing@nightfall.ai with questions, feedback, and suggestions about CISO Insider, including suggestions for CISOs you'd like to hear from. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you again next time.